I presume you're here in order to learn of Magecraft. I'll have you know, there's no room for the weak-willed in this course, and despite your best efforts, the sorcery of our time is but a fraction of what it once was in the Age of Gods. Much of the craft is established through pedigree, and the culture of mages is riddled with deception and moral depravity. That said, if you insist, I shall do my best to educate you in this miserable, yet fascinating world.
In our previous lesson, I spoke of Shiro Emiya's unique tracing Magecraft, a product of his origin of sword and mental landscape of unlimited bladeworks. An interesting aspect of this case was how Shiro was able to more readily learn his talents from a future version of himself. Heroic Spirit Emiya exists as a timeless version of Shiro that came from a single timeline, one in which he survived the Fifth Grail War and went on to become a wandering mercenary. This specific Shiro was plucked from that timeline and recorded into the Throne of Heroes in a way that he could be summoned into timelines other than his own. This logic can be incredibly confusing without a fundamental understanding of how our broader universe handles time, which is why I've decided to cover precisely that in our lesson today. The topic may prove to be our most troublesome concept yet, thanks to an abundance of specialized terminology, but my goal is to keep things as simple as possible so that time in our universe can be understood without the need for academic terms. This forces us to ask the most profound question: what exactly is time? In the most observable fashion, time describes how the present moves into the future. With every tick of the clock tower's hand that passes, our present becomes the past and is taken over by the future. It follows a chain of causality where one interaction influences others in a complex system of actions and reactions. Generally, time moves forward, leaving the past behind so that it could never be changed. Time travel does exist, but I'm starting with how things should be. The future, on the other hand, has yet to exist, instead consisting of seemingly endless possibilities. Your first reaction might be to assume those possibilities are theoretical, that ultimately only one possible outcome will arise. Assuming the world consisted of just one timeline, that logic would hold true. However, our universe is not so simple. While we are only ever part of a single world at a time, our universe at large consists of many adjacent worlds, in which other possible outcomes exist relative to their own dimensions. Time, then, is not merely one single timeline, but something that we call the Great Tree known as time. Whenever multiple possibilities exist on a conceptual level, meaning that you can imagine any given event going differently, then those theoretical worlds are in fact allowed to propagate independently, branching off from a shared point on the tree. A relevant example of this can be seen with the Fifth Grail War. Given that Grail Wars pit 7 master-servant pairs in combat against each other, it's easy to imagine various outcomes. Each competitor, for instance, has to imagine scenarios for whether they win or lose. Off the top of my head, I can point to 3 potential outcomes. In the first, the mage Shiro Emiya naively charges into battle despite having the King of Knights as his main weapon. As he struggles to understand his servant, he falls in love with her, and ultimately the two of them decide to end the Grail War by destroying the Lesser Grail. In another, Shiro confronts his alternate self, the disillusioned archer who once strived to be a hero of justice. Through combat, the two reaffirm their ideals, and Shiro learns to harness his own reality marble. Lastly, there's the possibility that Shiro becomes tangled in the darker elements of the war, discovering the horrific abuse of Sakura Mato, and the Grail being corrupted by Angra Mainyu. With certainty, these 3 alternative outcomes all exist within the universe, kept separate as unique worlds that all emerged from the start of the war. It's very likely that plenty of other alternatives also exist that we have yet to observe. After all, there are worlds in which the Fifth Holy Grail War doesn't happen at all. Instead, circumstances render the First War to be the only one, with its victor, Marisbury Animisphere, going on to establish the Chaldea Security Organization. We know these worlds exist because of the interactions we've had with them. The legendary mage Keisher Zelret Schweinorg possesses the second magic, Kaleidoscope, which allows him to observe and access other worlds. His jeweled sword even has the capacity to draw upon magical energy stored in such worlds. To an extent, this entails going back to previous points in time, allowing those timelines to be effectively rewritten. We've even witnessed a female-born Miyamoto Musashi who can mysteriously jump from one world to another, often at random. In the opposite direction, we've been able to encounter a male form of our iconic Artoria Pendragon, a man who came from his own alternative world. All of this is impressive, though it's important to realize the universe has its limits. Were the universe to account for every possible future, it would need to maintain an infinite number of worlds, quickly exhausting its lifespan. To maintain efficiency, then, the universe implements what is known as the conservation of phenomena, using different methods to effectively limit the kinds of alternate worlds that exist. If the tree known as time were visualized as such, then our universe preserves itself by trimming and grooming the tree so that it doesn't grow beyond control. Without guidance, you might expect branching realities to resemble more of a web than a tree, given that trees obviously have a trunk from which branches deviate. That implies there are certain timelines more consistent than others, but it turns out this is exactly how our universe works. The trimming of this tree is not done blindly. Rather, it prioritizes worlds, and thankfully, that bias favors the existence of humans. Indeed, despite our humble presence taking up less than a percentage of the Earth's overall history, and the Earth itself being just one of 700 quintillion planets in the cosmos, our universe judges which worlds to keep around based on the continued survival of humanity. Mind you, this does not guarantee mankind's existence in any given world. Instead, it ensures that worlds benefiting humanity will serve as the primary branch, or trunk of the tree known as time. More specifically, it prioritizes the greater history of man, also known as proper human history, which we currently benefit from being a part of. With human history being the basis for the tree known as time, our universe categorizes all of the various worlds into how it will respond to them. Those which lie in the proper axis are preserved, because none of the smaller possibilities they explore deviate too far from the trunk. While you may have heard of the butterfly effect, the idea that even the smallest changes can lead to tremendous waves in history, there are many actions we take that do not significantly alter our own timeline. Whether I choose to eat mapo tofu or some delicious curry bread for lunch likely won't, say, lead to another world war. As such, while worlds within the trunk do still vary, they average out to be more or less the same. Generally, when the universe finds worlds that deviate too far from the primary branch, it designates them for removal. These worlds fall victim to what we call the theoretical pruning phenomenon, being erased from existence altogether. Often, this occurs because a given world has run into a dead end. That doesn't just mean when humanity falls to ruin either. Ironically, it also includes worlds in which humanity has found such great prosperity that it can no longer develop or advance. In either direction, stagnation is the enemy. Thus, while the universe certainly prioritizes human survival, plenty of utopian scenarios are still rejected. With enough power or influence, however, a world designated for removal can still be preserved, should individuals will it so. A mysterious alien god, for instance, antagonizes proper human history by restoring 7 stagnant worlds called lostbelts. By rejecting the universe's system, the alien god plans to make one of these worlds the new primary branch of the tree. As for why, I cannot yet say, but it is an intimidating prospect when you consider the different lostbelts in isolation. One of them, for instance, deviates from our history when an asteroid strikes the Earth and triggers another ice age. The only way for people to survive in this harsh climate is to become magical beasts called Yaga. In another, history deviates such that the Norse prophecy of Ragnarok fails to complete, leaving a single goddess in charge of protecting the human race. Another lost belt has the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang conquering the entire world and turning himself into an immortal machine. The people living in these worlds are all trapped, unable to advance as a civilization due to oppression or ignorance. Whether these worlds deserve to exist normally isn't our call to make, but thanks to the alien god, Chaldea has to fight so that their own world doesn't meet the same fate. Culling or pruning deviant worlds isn't the only way the universe preserves what it deems to be proper human history. For the sake of efficiency, it also acts to prevent deviances from arising in the first place, utilizing a process known as quantum timelock. In essence, quantum timelock is achieved by pinning down specific events in history, guaranteeing they occur no matter the circumstance. It's as though the universe were making such events destined, bending causality or rewriting any deviant behaviors from steering history off course. Naturally, whenever quantum timelock occurs, any worlds that fail to include a certain event are immediately pruned. Those that remain become impervious to change, meaning that even if someone could go back in time to prevent that event, their actions would prove futile. For a light-hearted example, imagine my dilemma of choosing between mapo tofu or curry again. If the universe were to set a quantum time lock the moment I took a bite out of the curry, all worlds in which I chose mapo tofu or any other food would be pruned away. From then on, my choice of meal would be destined no matter the timeline, and not even time travelers could convince me otherwise. Somehow, some way, I would eat that curry. Thankfully, our universe isn't so petty. Oftentimes, quantum time locks have been secured around more important elements in our history, during formative periods such as the Industrial Revolution. In that regard, time locks make altering history much more difficult, though not entirely impossible. During the Grand Order, Chaldea fought against the demon god Hivemind Getia, who was attempting to rewrite the history of man from its onset. Simply traveling back in time would be easy enough, but making a substantial change in the timeline required Getia to essentially revoke 7 of the universe's most important time locks. For the energy needed to pull this off, Getia had to incinerate all of human history as fuel. During this time, in place of the time locks, Getia used holy grails to establish singularities, anomalies that were never observed in recorded history. They're like holes along the timeline in which possibilities flourish. Within them, major deviations from recorded history emerge, and if left unresolved, they can actually cause the collapse of our timeline. It's perhaps more appropriate to say that the 7 singularities were injuries to proper human history that destabilized the time locks. The saving grace of this is that singularities can be resolved and eliminated, restoring human history and undoing Getia's work. In the end, our universe accounts for various possibilities, allowing alternate worlds to branch out from each other. Every possible outcome exists as its own timeline, or would be if the universe could account for infinite possibilities. Since it can't, the universe limits these worlds by prioritizing proper human history and culling any worlds that deviate too far from it. It furthers this process with quantum time locks, pinning down critical moments in history so that they can't be changed. That said, beings within the universe can still interfere, such as the alien god preserving cold worlds as lostbelts, or Getia undoing the time locks with singularities. Thus far, everything I've said applies to individual universes like our own, but to complicate this further, we have to understand that there also exist parallel universes. While an adjacent or alternate world can be seen as a new branch on the tree of time, a parallel universe can be better thought of as an entirely separate tree. Worlds that feature the moon cell, for instance, exist in a parallel universe that follows its own criteria for proper human history. A quantum time lock from that universe doesn't really affect our own, and vice versa. This is observed within the moon cell's environment of Seraph. The servant Archimedes allies with an evil entity known as the Umbral Star, and slides between adjacent timelines in his universe, hoping to expose the moon cell and get it destroyed. Ultimately, his efforts are foiled by a quantum time lock that occurs just after his defeat, meaning that no matter how much he tries to travel back and alter events within the moon cell, he can't contact the Umbral Star until its next cycle. Considering our universe doesn't even have the moon cell, there's no way a time lock involving it could apply to our own timelines. As such, the time locks and pruning are relative to each universe, and it's currently beyond our grasp to conceive of what lies beyond the different parallel universes that expand beside one another. I personally find it easiest to imagine it as a forest, with all the trees standing in for a much larger multiverse. In summation, time typically moves in one direction, from present to the future. While it would be nice to imagine time flowing in a single, linear path, the fact that the future is generally indeterminate means that any given timeline can go in a number of directions. Our universe allows for various possibilities to play out as adjacent worlds, but limits these worlds as though a person were maintaining a large tree. The tree's trunk, or center, is an ideal called proper human history, which exists because the universe prioritizes it over other possible timelines. It designates events in this history as absolute, tightening the tree's base together. Alternate worlds that deviate too much wind up pruned, like trimming a tree's more chaotic branches. Our universe is actually just one tree of many, however, meaning that relative to any given universe, a whole new proper history gives way to more adjacent worlds. As a mage, it is important to understand this complex system of timelines as we come into contact with other adjacent or parallel worlds. One way is through the use of true magic. Heroic spirits recorded into the Throne of Heroes can often be recorded from one timeline and summoned to another. Then, there are rare and unique entities who can slide between worlds, either intentionally or at random. Going forward, as I continue to teach Magecraft, I want you to understand that these lessons apply across nearly all relevant worlds. If there are any significant exceptions, I'll be sure to point them out. That said, for our next lesson, I intend to cover the reverse side of the world, as well as clarify what it means for a given world to have different textures. Before I go ahead and roll the credits, I want to give a vocal shout out to all my $10 plus supporters: Video Gamer 75, Samuel Gersten, Stephen Elak, Jens Bauman, RNG or Shuffles 1498, Josh, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
Celebrate your fandom!